Hello everybody, and today we are going to go over Unit 1, Lesson 1, Ecology and Ecosystems. So ecology is just the study of connections in nature between the biotic, which are the living, and the abiotic, the non-living components. So when we talk about ecology in our environment, we're not just talking about the organisms that live there, we're also talking about all of the non-living or the abiotic factors that contribute to our environment as well. So just because we're living beings, it doesn't mean we don't rely on non-living resources as well. We all need water, we need sunlight. The soil is a very important component of contributing to our thriving on this planet. And so we do have to study the interaction of both those living and non-living things. We have to know the different levels of organization in ecology. So on the lowest level, we have the organism, which is just the individual. Next, we have populations, and populations are just a larger group of the same species. So in this example, we have a deer, or I think that might be an elk. Not an elk. It's some kind of prairie deer. I'm trying to think. The antlers look a little bit off. But anyway, you have one organism on the bottom, and then multiple of those organisms of the one species make up the population. A community is made of different populations of different species, so there are multiple populations coming together to make up a community. And then an ecosystem is both the communities, so different populations of different species, as well as the abiotic factors that are going on in an area. So an ecosystem could include the soil, the water, the sunlight, and the communities that live there. And then finally, we have our biosphere, which is the largest level of organization. It encompasses all the other ones. So the biosphere is the planet, basically. So the biosphere encompasses all the different spheres of the planet, and it includes everything below it. So the biosphere includes ecosystems. Ecosystems include communities. Communities include populations, and then populations include individual organisms. So we do need to know that hierarchy. Oops. So there are three factors that sustain life on Earth. Number one is the one-way flow of high quality energy. So when we talk about energy flow in ecosystems, it always goes from the most energy to the least. So it flows in one direction. It goes from the producers at the bottom, so those are the grass and the trees and the plants, all the way up to top consumers. Now we're going to do a whole lesson on trophic levels and how energy moves and how to calculate productivity, but we do need to know it flows in one way. The next is round-trip cycling of matter or nutrients through the biosphere. So there are different biogeochemical cycles that we have to know. Those are the sulfur, nitrogen, water, carbon, and phosphorus cycles. So you guys are probably familiar with the water cycle, but by the time that this particular unit is over, we will be familiar with all of them. Now, the phosphorus cycle is unique here. If you notice, nitrogen, water, carbon, sulfur, they all have little clouds with them, and then the phosphorus is just a pile of rocks. That's because the phosphorus cycle does not have an atmospheric component. So I've noticed a lot of test questions that love to ask which of the biosphere or which of the geochemical cycles do not have an atmospheric component. It's phosphorus. So that just means that there's not phosphorus gas in the air. So when we talk about the cycling of phosphorus, it stays in the ground. And also gravity. So gravity is going to be that third factor. Without it, we wouldn't be rooted to the planet and we would not be able to thrive here. So again, just a reminder, biotic means living or once living. So bio means life. And abiotic means non-living. So A means without. So abiotic means without life. So the biotic factors are going to be living organisms, and the abiotic factors are going to be things like the soil, sunlight, water, anything that's non-living. So in ecosystems, there are different relationships that we have to know about. And these relationships are called symbiotic relationships. So all of these examples are symbiotic relationships. Symbiosis just means two organisms interacting. So all of these are examples of symbiotic relationships. So the first one is mutualism. That's where two organisms benefit. So in that relationship, both of them get something good out of the relationship. The next is commensalism. That's where one organism benefits and the other doesn't experience any harm or benefit. So they're just neutral, they're unaffected. And then finally, parasitism. That is where one organism is benefited and the other is harmed. A lot of times parasites do not want to kill their host because they rely on them for energy sources. They feed off of them. So tapeworms would be a really good example of parasites, and also ticks are a good example of parasites. Now, a lot of times students get confused about predation and parasitism because parasites do technically feed on their hosts. However, with predation, when in a predatory relationship, they kill and eat their prey. Okay, so a predator will kill their prey and eat them. A host or a parasite in a host does not necessarily want to kill their prey because they need them to feed off of them. So they don't have to kill them to get the nutrients they need. So in predation, one animal is killing the other. In parasitism, one animal is feeding off of another one, but not necessarily killing them. And then, of course, we have herbivory as well, and that's just when animals consume vegetation. So when a deer eats grass, that's an example of herbivory, which is a symbiotic relationship. So what I need you to do right now is go ahead and pause this video if you are watching it and try to read through these scenarios and determine whether these are a parasitic relationship, mutualistic, or commensalistic relationship. So you just put a P, a C, or an M. All right, so let's check our answers. So this first one is parasitism, and this is where the flea is feeding on the dog, and again, not killing the dog, but feeding off of the dog and acting as a parasite. So the dog is harmed, the flea benefits. This second one, both the algae and the fungus are receiving a benefit, so that's mutualistic. The third one, the termite and the bacteria, they're both getting a benefit, so the bacteria is getting food and the termite is getting its food digested that it wouldn't be able to otherwise, so that's mutualistic. The shark and the remora, that's commensalistic because the remora are getting food, so they're benefited. The shark is not affected, so that's a neutral, so that's commensalistic. This one is commensalistic because the egret's getting food that the cattle kick up. The cattle don't get any benefit from it, but they're also not harmed. And then finally, the tapeworm and the human, that's parasitic. So tapeworm will live in your small intestines and it will grow and it will rob you of your nutrients. So a niche is a species' role in its environment. So it's its preferred habitat, its position in the food web, and also its mating and eating behaviors. So if you say that a species has a specific niche, it's kind of like its role in the environment. So its job in the environment. What does it do? What kind of space does it take up? And does it have any special roles in the environment? So a niche is just the role that it occupies. We have to be aware of something called resource partitioning, and this is when species avoid competition by dividing the use of resources. So at first glance at this tree, we have these different species of birds living in the tree, and it may seem like they all live and share the same resources, but what they're actually doing is they're divvying it up, okay? So this Blackbirdian warbler, he has this specific spot of the tree. And then this bay-breasted warbler, he might be in this particular part of the tree. So they divvy up the resources. That's what partitioning is. It's dividing it up. So they divide it up so that there's no competition. And competition is when two organisms compete for the same resource. You can compete for food, water. You can compete for habitat, for mates. But by doing resource partitioning, you're eliminating competition because you know that you have a set place on that tree and that you shouldn't be going into another organism's territory to look for resources. And then finally, we need to know the competitive exclusion principle. So again, this relates to competition. If competition is present, then species will be excluded from niches they might otherwise be able to inhabit. So the fundamental niche is the possible niche, and the realized niche is the actual niche that's present with competition. So what does that mean? So here we have the Cathylamus, right? This is some kind of like sea barnacle. And this is its fundamental niche, okay? It could thrive here on this rock, in this area, the saltwater area. If it was the only one present, then it would be able to populate the entire rock from the bottom of the tide all the way to the top, okay? So it needs water to thrive, but it can survive the comings and goings of the tide. So this would be its fundamental niche, what it could potentially achieve. However, there's also this other semi-balanus crustacean that is larger and therefore probably better at competing for resources. So it overtakes a lot of the bottom of this niche, or the bottom of this rock, okay? So the fundamental niche is not realized because this guy has to compete with the larger guy, right? So its realized niche is actually a lot smaller than its fundamental niche, okay? So the realized niche is just the area that an organism takes up when you take competition into account. Because when there's competition present, you're not going to be able to realize your full potential because you're fighting with another organism for resources. And that is Unit 1, Lesson 1. The biggest takeaways from this, we need to know the competitive exclusion principle, and we do need to know the difference between the different relationships. So parasitism, mutualism, commensalism. Okay? So you guys have an activity to do today where you're going to do a species poster, and you guys can go ahead and get started on that as soon as your notes are done. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye, guys.